I spend my time representing clients in their legal disputes before international tribunals. That is my day job. So I do not stand before you here today doing something that I normally do. I'm not here to speak on behalf of a client. I'm not here to argue a legal case. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are not an international tribunal, although I invite you to judge what I say nevertheless. Why am I here, you might legitimately ask? Well, I'm here because I disagree with my friend, Gliarchos Kyriakidis. I'm here, let me state it simply, because I fear that a historic mistake is being advocated by some on this island. A mistake that will lead unintentionally, but no less inevitably, to the permanent division of this island. A mistake that it would be too late to rectify. For time is running out for a solution of the Cyprus problem. And if that self-evident statement requires demonstration, and some might think that it does not, let me do so. Let me demonstrate it by recalling a recent tragedy I should say, that the world has already half forgotten. It is the story of a young and proud republic, a republic that is small but strategically located, a republic that finally obtained its independence after many years of domination by an overpowering neighbor, a republic whose powerful neighbor still coveted control over that small republic and used its small ethnic minority within the republic to claim and exert such control. It is a story that came to a tragic climax during the long days of a single summer when that powerful neighbor was finally given a pretext to invade and occupy an enclave purportedly in defense of its minority. A pretext that was nothing more than a pretext, and long after that pretext has vanished, long after that summer passed, that powerful neighbor's forces continue to occupy those enclaves, which it has since unilaterally recognized as independent. Now, these facts will, I'm sure, sound painfully familiar to Cypriots. But I am not describing Cyprus in the summer of 1974. I'm describing what happened to the Republic of Georgia in the summer of 2008. I'm describing an invasion that happened not 40 years ago, but 4 years ago. I'm describing an invasion that the world has nevertheless already half forgotten. So let us not hold an exaggerated sense of the world's attention span or its innate sense of justice. Let us not simply, as Cypriots, repeat the mantras of invasion and occupation as if they will magically lead us to the perfect solution we want for this island. As we approach the 40th anniversary of the Turkish invasion, let us recognize that for most of the world, Cyprus is no longer a crisis. It is a problem. And soon, it will not even be a problem beyond Cyprus. I fear that it is naive to think otherwise, and after what the Cypriot people have endured over the last half-century, history at this moment, I don't think will forgive naivety. So against the background of a clock ticking ever louder, I ask only one question in this address today, the right answer to which is critical, in my view, to there being even a chance of settling the Cyprus question in the time that still remains for doing so. That question is this: can we realistically expect anything other than a bizonal, bicommunal federation as the basis for a permanent solution to a division on this island that has now lasted 40 years? And let me tell you who I am in my own words to offer an answer to that question. The perspective that I offer is the perspective of someone who is of Cyprus, but paradoxically, because of the invasion, has not remained Cyprus-centric. As Glerchos mentioned, my parents are Cypriot. I was born on this island, and like many Cypriots in the summer of 1974, I was forced to flee my home because of the Turkish invasion. But for that invasion, I would have grown up a Cypriot. Despite that invasion, I'm very proud of my Cypriot roots. And like many who lived the invasion, my own experience as a child, I'm afflicted by the deep sense of injustice that is its enduring aftertaste. I was 4 years old when an overwhelming number of Turkish soldiers marched through this island. The phrase ethnic cleansing did not exist then, but that is what it was. It was not a bloodless invasion, and I personally will never forget it. Understandably, many Cypriots still feel the anger of dispossession, and no one can blame us for that. But it is not that emotion, enduring as it is, that will lead us to the promised land of a solution. The mindset of war will not achieve a lasting peace. To settle the Cyprus problem, what is required, in my view, and in this sense, Cyprus is no different from any other ethnic conflict zone, is a final act of courage by those who have been its victims, the courage to compromise. And so in the face of an apparent growing intolerance to compromise amongst some on this island, it is constitutional compromise that I personally continue to support and advocate. Now, such compromise will not meet with universal acclaim. It will disappoint some and provoke others. And in this respect, I must observe that from a distance, I see that the Cyprus debate as a national discourse has somewhat degenerated in recent years. Instead of a respectful recognition that fellow Cypriots can legitimately hold views that differ on this most important of questions, I've noticed that those who participate often most vociferously on the Cyprus issue respond to those who hold opposing views not simply by questioning their ideas, but by contesting their motives and their patriotism. Such personalized attacks undermine mature democratic debate. They demean all participants in the dialogue, and they inhibit rather than encourage progress to a rational consensus. So as I begin my attempt to address the question that I pose, let me make a request, and that is that we question each other's ideas without questioning each other's loyalty. And so with that request, let me turn to my single question, and let me begin by addressing it by looking at the lessons of the past. And the relevant past, for these purposes, must begin before the Turkish invasion of 1974, with the island's 14 years of independence that preceded it. And there are two obvious things to say about that independence. The first is that it was but a short interlude in over 500 years of Ottoman and British foreign subjugation. And the second observation is that those 14 years were far from unitary. As many here know, indeed some of you may even personally remember, during those 14 short years, Cyprus had more than one constitutional crisis that was created by, and as a result, supplemented communal strife and division. In 1963, following constitutional amendments proposed by President Makarios, which were aimed at diminishing constitutional recognition of ethnic identity and division, well motivated, fighting broke out between the two communities that, as many of you know, led to the end of Turkish Cypriot participation in the Republic's government, the withdrawal of many Turkish Cypriots into geographic enclaves, and the establishment of an international peacekeeping force on the island of Cyprus. Not exactly features of a healthy unitary state. In 1967, the outbreak of intercommunal fighting once again led to the threat of a Turkish invasion, the reinforcement of those Turkish enclaves, and the Turkish Cypriots proclaiming their own provisional administration. So those 14 years of independence, unitary independence, were thus brief, fragile, and anything but unified. That is the historical context. Since the invasion of 1974, against the backdrop of what became total geographic and political division, numerous reunification plans have been proposed to the parties internationally. In all of these, from the very first in 1977, the four-point agreement signed by President Makarios and Ralph Denktash in February 1977, the Republic of Cyprus has accepted that a future settlement would be based on a federation made up of two states, bizonal, and two communities, bicommunal. Now, as these plans came and went over the following 30 years, two trends became discernible. The first was that the Turkish Cypriot side, under Denktaş's leadership, kept retreating from the principle of bizonal, bicommunal federation, proposing eventually a form of confederation which amounted to a poorly disguised, legitimized permanent division by another name. The second trend was that in so doing, Mr. Denktaş invited widespread international condemnation for his blatant negotiating bad faith. That condemnation hardened into an international determination to ensure that Turkish Cypriot intransigence in settlement discussions would not prejudice the Republic's aspiration to become a member of the European Union. An aspiration that, as we all know, was realized on the 1st of May 2004 when Cyprus finally acceded to the EU. That was a day that, as a member of the Cypriot diaspora, then living and working in Paris, I shall never forget. It was a day that taught us, or should have taught us, the value of maintaining a reasonable negotiating position in the face of diplomatic provocation. That was then. Over the last 10 years, the widespread international support that the Republic achieved has been steadily but significantly eroded, I must tell you. And nothing has contributed to that damaging erosion more than the manner in which, at the same time as European admission, the Republic of Cyprus rejected the Annan Plan. Whatever the flaws of the Annan Plan, and there were many, whatever the inappropriate manner in which it was foisted upon the people of Cyprus at the 11th hour, which can only be described as shabby, we must recognize that Greek Cypriots have paid a very heavy price internationally for the manner in which it was rejected. Under President Papadopoulos' leadership, Greek Cypriots metamorphosized into the party that said no. And as a consequence, whether Greek Cypriots like it or not, rightly or wrongly, so far as international public opinion is concerned, we have now forfeited much, not all, but much, of the moral high ground in future settlement discussions. We Greek Cypriots may rightly regard ourselves as the victims of a long-standing Turkish aggression, and we were. But so far as the world is concerned, we now share some of the responsibility for the failure to find a solution. Now, even recognizing the shortcomings, the many shortcomings of the Annan Plan, the way in which the Greek Cypriot government maneuvered itself into the position of taking the blame for the debacle of the UN's last initiative was a huge political failure. As a consequence, President Erdogan now tours the world telling leaders that the Greek Cypriots moan about the number of Turkish soldiers on the island of Cyprus, but that if the Annan Plan had been accepted in 2004, there would today be fewer Turkish soldiers on the island than Greek Cypriot soldiers. That is what he's saying. Now, against that recent historical backdrop, for Greek Cypriots today, now to go further and reverse 35 years of acceptance of the principle of bizonal, bicommunal federation, something that we did not do even when rejecting the Annan Plan, would be political folly on a historic scale. Not only does it have zero chance of acceptance by Turkey and Turkish Cypriots, of course, but it will benefit from no international support, even from the Republic of Cyprus's allies. In a world in which international support is required for political success, we cannot achieve a solution simply by persuading ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. Such revisionism is worse than futile. So why should some Greek Cypriots encourage their government to shoot themselves in the foot in this monumental way? Well, for the best possible reason, some say, in the pursuit of principle. And it is to that principle that I turn next. That principle can be stated in the following stirring terms. Let us leave behind the divisions of the past. Let us not define and discriminate on the basis of ethnicity. Let us establish a future in which all Cypriots are equal before the constitutional law, be they Greeks, Turks, Armenians, Maronites, or the growing number of immigrants who newly contribute to the Cypriot polity and economy. Is that, ladies and gentlemen, not after all, so the argument goes, what it means to be European in the 21st century? Well, this sounds like an ideal world, ladies and gentlemen, but it is not the real world. It is not the real world of Cyprus today. And regrettably, it will not be the real world of Cyprus today until some history of reintegration of the two principal communities is established. We cannot simply brush aside 50 years of division as if they're just words on a page that can be turned. Whether we like it or not, Cypriots do presently define themselves by reference to the community that they belong to. Indeed, some go further and in truth define themselves by reference to not being of the other community. Now, we must all hope that one day that division will become less meaningful. In fact, we must look for a settlement that accommodates such future ethnic rapprochement, rather than a settlement that cements the present division. But today, the communal division that has characterized this island for 40 years could scarcely be more meaningful. And ignoring that reality, even if such a solution could be imposed without international support, which of course it cannot, would not be a secure foundation for a lasting settlement. Imagine what problems this might cause the day after settlement is achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, you do not resolve division by suppressing it. For those schooled in the history of international conflict resolution, that is a statement of the obvious. And there exist countless examples of successful peace settlements of ethnic conflicts, such as Cyprus's, that are of necessity based on a recognition of ethnic division. Let me give you one example, an example that I am personally familiar with. It's the Irish example. In 1995, as the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the British Conservative Party's Bow Group, a think tank within the Conservative Party, I led a delegation of young UK political activists to Dublin Castle, the former seat of government in Ireland, to address the leaders of Ireland's political parties on a series of proposals that we had derived for bi-communal rapprochement in Northern Ireland. We presented to all of the leaders of all of Ireland's leading political parties, including all those figures some of you will be familiar with. I found myself sitting right opposite Gerry Adams for the first and last time in my life. And I should tell you that we found ourselves as a group of young politicos, I was in my early to mid-20s at that time, in Ireland at a time when the peace process, through happenstance, was entering a critical phase. That critical phase began with the IRA ceasefire in the August of 1994, just a few months before we arrived, and it was given momentum by a joint paper by the British and Irish governments in February 1995 entitled A New Framework for Agreement, in which both the British and the Irish governments set out what they referred to as a shared understanding to assist discussion and negotiations involving the Northern Ireland parties. Now, in this document, both governments stated in broad but very significant terms the following principles. And because of their relevance to what I'm saying today, I'm going to quote an extract from that document verbatim. The British and Irish governments agreed in this new framework document as follows. Given the absence of consensus and the depth of divisions between the two main traditions in Northern Ireland, the two governments agreed a new approach to the traditional constitutional doctrines on both sides. This would be aimed at enhancing and codifying the fullest attainable measure of consent across both traditions in Ireland. And on this basis, they agreed, and here's the critical text, that institutions and arrangements in Northern Ireland should afford both communities secure and satisfactory political, administrative, and symbolic expression and protection. And in particular, the governments commit themselves to, and I'm quoting, entrenched provisions guaranteeing equitable and effective political participation for whichever community finds itself in a minority position. They were committing themselves to a constitutional recognition of ethnicity and the protection of the ethnic minority. Now, as anyone versed in the story of Northern Ireland will immediately be able to confirm to you, the framework agreement was a momentous compromise by both sides in the search for peace. And it was not the end of the road in finding a solution either. It was really the beginning of the end. The remaining road to peace was neither short nor without incident, including the temporary ending of the IRA ceasefire in February 1996, a date all Londoners will remember because it was followed within a matter of days by the explosion by the IRA of a huge bomb in London's Docklands. I think actually it was 1 hour after the IRA's announcement of the end of the ceasefire. But that road, bumpy as it was, eventually did lead to agreement in April 1998 with the so-called Good Friday Agreement, signed by the political parties of Northern Ireland and the British and Irish governments. For those of you who don't know, let me tell you something of that momentous Good Friday Agreement. Putting firmly to one side simple majority rule, the agreement contemplated an inclusive Northern Ireland government, troop reductions, and what was referred to as parity of esteem for both divided communities in Northern Ireland, by which I mean the unionist community, those mostly Protestant who wanted to continue union with the United Kingdom, and those of the Republican community, those mostly Catholics who strove for Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. That agreement was followed by a referendum in both Northern Ireland and Ireland, which it was easy for those on both sides of the ethnic divide to advocate rejection of. And many of them did on the basis of principle. On the unionist side, the No campaign focused on the apparent one-sided nature of the process. We, after all, we unionists are the majority in Northern Ireland. The apparent dilution of that majority rule was not popular. And on the Republican side, the No campaign concentrated on the purity of the Republican ideal of complete independence from Britain, the colonial overlord, pointing to the overwhelming majority of Catholics when you took the island of Ireland as a whole. So some on both sides denounce the compromise as an attack on simple, non-ethnic, constitutional rule of law. But in the name of peace, the people of Northern Ireland, who'd suffered for a generation or two, voted yes, with majorities in both the Republic and in Northern Ireland. And although we don't have the detailed data breakdown that would help us confirm this, there is an understanding that both the Republican and the Unionist communities of Northern Ireland, in the Unionist case, only a slim majority, voted in favour of the Good Friday Agreement. The resulting constitutional arrangement is instructive, ladies and gentlemen, for all those around the world searching genuinely for a political settlement of ethnic conflict. For the agreement recognized in a variety of important ways the need for compulsory bi-communal involvement in all of the institutions of Northern Ireland's government. So the Assembly, the House of Parliament, is elected by way of a system of proportional representation, it's called PRSTV, designed to ensure the representation of all communities, including the minority communities. And they do this by requiring for some issues parallel consent, so majorities of both communities, and on other issues what's referred to as weighted majority, which means a vote including at least 40% of each of the nationalist, the Republican, and Unionist designates. In addition to the Assembly, so far as the executive is concerned, the executive is selected on a cross-community basis, so the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister reflect the two communities. One will be a Republican, the other will be from the Protestant community. And the posts of ministers are allocated on the basis of what is known in international constitutional law as the D'Hondt system, a system that is used in over 30 legislatures around the world where ethnic divisions exist, as diverse as Belgium in the European Union, and Brazil, as diverse as Paraguay and Poland, to ensure an allocation of ministerial portfolios to all major parties across community divides. Importantly, recognition was included in the Good Friday Agreement of the responsibility of the British government to ensure compliance with European law, which was also enshrined in the final paragraph of that agreement. But the peace settlement in Northern Ireland, notwithstanding that final sentence, that final paragraph, was nevertheless constructing a system of government unlike that in most parts of the European Union. But it did so, ladies and gentlemen, in the interests of peace, a peace that has endured. And today, many years later, many years of peace later, only the few remaining dissident extremists in Northern Ireland denounce such inclusive democracy as a compromise that was not worth achieving. Now, there are, of course, many differences between the situation in Northern Ireland and that in Cyprus. I should tell you that after my presentation at Dublin Castle, we had lunch with the delegates, and Gerry Adams, in fact, approached me and was intrigued a little bit by my name and said, what is a British Conservative doing with a name like Constantine Partasides? He asked me where I was from, and I told him that I was born in Cyprus and that my parents were Cypriot and I was of Cypriot origin. And he said, Cyprus, another divided island where the majority have been subjugated by the minority. He was pointing to what he referred to as a parallel between the Republican position and the Greek Cypriot position. It was a parallel, I have to tell you, I rejected on the spot for a variety of reasons, including the methods, of course, that the Republicans had used to wage their war against what they referred to as minority subjugation for a generation. There are significant differences between Northern Ireland and Cyprus, but there are also parallels, and there are lessons to be learned from those parallels. The first lesson is that the solution to a historic ethnic divide is not found simply by pretending that the division does not exist. Let me repeat. You do not resolve division by suppressing it. The second lesson is that a stable solution involves both sides across the divide reaching out and forsaking their respective perfect solutions. The third lesson is that the resulting compromise can work and can endure. Even in a region like Northern Ireland, where blood was being spilt right up until the day that the agreement was signed. Now, these are, I would suggest, important lessons, ladies and gentlemen, for us here in Cyprus. And Northern Ireland is not the only recent example of different communities in a conflict zone compromising for peace by accepting an ethnically denominated constitution. Bosnia provides us with another example. For Bosnia, the Dayton Peace Agreement forged the creation of a central state with a collective presidency of one Bosniak, that's a Bosnian Muslim, one Bosnian Serb, and one Bosnian Croat. This was the price of peace. And most Bosnians today will confirm to you that it has been a price worth paying. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you that I think it takes a special kind of arrogance to brush aside these examples of careful compromise as good enough for other victims of conflicts, but not good enough for Cyprus. In truth, those that propose pure majority rule, democracy, as a solution for Cyprus, treating Cyprus as if it was France or England with many hundreds, if not thousands of years of unified history, must know in their heart of hearts that in fact such proposals in reality mean no solution. And let us recognize that that is a legitimate position to hold after all these years. Perhaps the status quo is not the worst of all scenarios, and all of us should recognize that even a successful solution will be hugely disruptive and at times traumatic for the people of Cyprus. But advocacy in favor of permanent division should be stated openly, and it should be stated honestly. It should not be dressed up to masquerade as the alternate route to a perfect settlement that it is not. There is no perfect solution that can be delivered. That much is now clear. Those who pretend otherwise, who suggest that simply reciting the words invasion and occupation will lead us to our promised land, I fear are throwing sand in our eyes. So let me encourage us to sweep aside platitudes that are easy to say to each other, but get us nowhere with others. Let us have an honest debate. After all these years, in my view, the choice now is between those who are willing to compromise to find a solution and those who are not, and are consequently consigning the island to permanent division. And for those unwilling to consign the future of Cyprus to permanent and eventually legitimize division, bizonal, bicommunal federation represents the only alternative. The next question, in my view the real question, the much more relevant question, is what kind of bizonal, bicommunal settlement is achievable and fair enough to endure? That is the real question before us. And the position that I've sought to address, the question that I've sought to address in this address, should not obscure it. Although not the subject of my paper, I do want to end by saying a few words on what I consider to be the requirements of a fair federal solution. The quid pro quo of the difficult majority compromise that I have been advocating is that the compromise must be, and must be perceived to be, fundamentally balanced and fair to the majority. And I cannot help but suspect that the recent rejections that are growing on this island of bizonal, bicommunal federation arise only because the forms of federal solution offered by successive external peace brokers are not seen by the majority as sufficiently balanced and fair. The Greek Cypriot majority will undoubtedly make significant concessions, as we have already done in negotiations, on territorial, governance, EU and economic issues. But they cannot and should not be expected to do so without a sense of basic fairness in the resolution of property dispossessions and the security question that arise from foreign troop numbers that are to be left on the island following the settlement. Let me take the example of property and recognize, as I do, that any solution that requires the vast majority of still living dispossessed citizens to say goodbye to properties that were their home is too difficult a solution for any political leader to deliver. And I don't believe they need to. Once again, let us look at the examples that we're offered elsewhere. Examples of successful implementation of property repossessions in conflict zones. The return of over 1 million displaced persons and refugees to destroyed villages throughout the whole territory of Bosnia, from all ethnic zones to all geographic zones, surely challenges those who doubt its appropriateness in Cyprus to at least give good reasons why it's no longer appropriate in Cyprus. Restitution in Bosnia has worked. Property has been restored to those from whom it was stolen. Dividing lines between communities have been made permeable, and as a result, a future beyond segregation in Bosnia is once again real. Why should Cyprus, where less blood flowed less recently, expect less? Now, the unfairness of officialized dispossession, in my view, is exacerbated by the insecurity of legitimized militarization. And so I come to the question of the Turkish army on the island. The genuine fear created by a large standing Turkish army on the island of Cyprus, which is after all only 40 miles from the Turkish coast, where proximate troops can be placed much less controversially, cannot easily be brushed aside. An overwhelming large and ever-present military presence can be no basis for a lasting solution when you are asking the majority to compromise, particularly as it is so obviously serving no legitimate military purpose. So on these issues, compromise must come from those that did the dispossessing on both sides, and from the party with overwhelming military preponderance in the locality, Turkey. Now, I remain convinced that the result of that mutual compromise can be a solution that endures, and endure long enough to see the constitutional compromises that I advocate become less necessary. As the need for an ethnically focused constitution becomes less necessary in the future, so the need for ethnic quotas and a standing army should, it is hoped, recede into irrelevance. And it is for that reason that the compromise solution that I am looking for on all issues should make express provision for periodic constitutional evolution in the future, when we must hope ethnic tension and suspicion has declined. In this way, communities can more easily be invited to accept the proposed arrangement as an initial solution rather than a final solution. And we can continue to work towards the ideal advocated by some for the future. And so to my conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, in November 2010, Gliarchos and I were discussing an article that had just appeared in the Times of London, published by Jack Straw, the former British Foreign Secretary, who wrote, he'd just given up the position of Foreign Secretary, as follows: "It is time for the UK government to consider formally the partition of Cyprus if the talks fail." Now, it does not matter what we think of Mr. Straw. And it does not matter that we vehemently denounced and denounce such remarks. What matters is that they are now being said openly amongst the European establishment. And I can assure you that they will be said with ever greater regularity all around the world in the years to come. But more important than the words of transient politicians who come and go are the judgments of the world's international courts. And here too, time may be beginning to work against us. For after a generation of cases before the European Court of Human Rights that have found against Turkey for depriving Greek Cypriots of their fundamental right to property, in 2010, in its decision in the case of Demopoulos and others versus Turkey, we saw the European Court of Human Rights signal perhaps the emergence of a changing legal reality, finding, as it did then, that the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus's establishment of an immovable property commission can, as a matter of law, potentially offer adequate redress for dispossession. The European Court of Human Rights made an observation that profoundly challenges those tempted to think that Greek Cypriots can wait and wait until they get the solution that they prefer. Let me read you a key extract. The court said this: "At the present point, many decades after the loss of possession by the then owners, property has in many cases changed hands, by gift, succession, or otherwise. Those claiming title may have never seen or ever used the property in question. The issue arises to what extent the notion of legal title and the expectation of enjoying the full benefits of that title is realistic in practice. The losses thus claimed become increasingly speculative and hypothetical. There has, it may be recalled, always been a strong legal and factual link between ownership and possession. And it must be recognized that with the passage of time, the holding of a title may be emptied of any practical consequence." As my former property law professor used to tell me, possession is 9/10 of the law, and time waits for no man, even if that man happens to be the victim, ladies and gentlemen. So as we debate these questions, let us recognize that the time for finding a solution is not unlimited. We cannot simply wait and wait and wait until we get what we want. No solution now, at some point in the not too distant future, means no solution at all. And no solution is, let us say it openly, again, a viable option for Greek Cypriots. For we should be under no illusions. A solution to the division will undoubtedly bring uncertainty and without doubt a period of greater insecurity. Ethnic tensions may not have been the original cause of the division, many of us know, but we must accept that it may now follow as a consequence of the 40 years of division that we have lived. Extremists can be expected to stoke tensions on both sides the day after a settlement, and the prospect of Islamic extremism on this island is not far-fetched. The ethnic makeup of the island will also visibly change. Greek Cypriots must acknowledge that in pulling down the wall, our Cyprus will change as well. And of course, there will be an acute economic cost to reunification that initially at least will not be offset by the commercial opportunities that arise from reunification. In short, the price of reunification should not be underestimated. But for all those like me who consider the Green Line to be an open wound across our ancestral home, the price, I believe, remains worth paying for Cyprus to become whole again. And if the problems of reunification are overcome, reunification will bring its own special prize for having served as a generation as an international symbol of ethnic strife, a successfully reunified Cyprus can serve as a future beacon of hope for all those around the world who question the compatibility of Western and Islamic civilization in one land. That, ladies and gentlemen, I believe to be a vision worth showing courage for. That, I believe, is a future worth compromising for. Thank you for your attention.